everybody. The hour being after 7 o'clock, I'd like to call the March 30th, 2021 School Building Committee meeting to order. Per Governor Baker's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, the public will not be allowed to physically access the School Building Committee meeting. Members of the public will be able to view this meeting on the Walpole Media Cable Access. The School Building Committee reserves the right to implement additional remote participation procedures and will notify the public of these procedures as soon as practicable. Citizens with questions or comments should email mmortali@walpole.k12.ma.us. Thank you. Our next order of business is approval of the meeting minutes for March 16th, 2021. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, I'd accept a motion to approve the March 16th, 2021 meeting minutes.
I'll move, Mark.
I have a motion from Mr. Fisher. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Ms. Gayositz. So I'm going to poll the committee, if you pardon me while I scroll through here. Dr. Goff.
Yes.
Ms. Gallivan.
Yes.
Ms. Gayositz.
Yes.
Mr. Fisher.
Yes.
Mr. John Fisher.
Yes.
Mr. Jeffrey Fisher.
Yes.
Ms. Lawson.
Yes.
Mr. Senek.
Yes.
Mr. Connor.
Yes.
Mr. Conroy.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
And Mr. Salvatore.
Abstain.
Abstain. Did I miss anybody?
Yes. Me, Katia. Santiago Taylor.
I'm sorry, Ms. Santiago Taylor as well.
Yes.
Okay, and I vote yes as well. It is a vote. Our next order of business is the schematic design phase progress report. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Jarvis and Mr. Pena.
Tony, you want to run us through these?
Yeah. So this is just a quick update on where we are with the PSR comments and the facilities assessment subcommittee. Both of these ended up happening on the same day. Early in the day on March 24th, we attended the facilities assessment subcommittee, which was a presentation that we put together along with TAPE and the district, which is intended to review certain aspects of the design as it relates to the ED program. The MSBA technical staff that sit in on those meetings are looking at very specific things, and they're specialists. Some of them are educators, some of them are designers. Their feedback was actually really good. They liked the connection between the district's educational program and the spaces. They did ask us to obviously continue to develop a few different items, which is not unnormal. Obviously the design is at a very preliminary stage, but they're looking for a little bit more in the next submission on connections to outdoor learning. They had some comments about special ed. A lot of the site plan stuff that they talked about, we're gonna review again tonight with the progress that we've made. One of the big takeaways was they're sticking to their requirements related to the science rooms. So we have to put back central chemical storage and also the storage spaces. And that was also given to us in the PSR response comments later in that same day. On March 24th, comments came out, and the biggest takeaway there is we're probably going to be needing to add the we did cut out quite a few square feet as an exercise in tightening up, but we're probably going to have to add back roughly around 2,000 square feet just related to those science rooms. The technical staff and some of the staff from the MSBA, their comments were that most districts are coming in their SOI saying that their science rooms aren't adequate. So they have a pretty hard line in policy around science rooms. So we'll be revisiting that in the next couple of months of design.
I'll add to that. So they wanted to put back in the prep rooms. We were hoping that the science lab spaces themselves, which are 1,440 square feet, they're very large. They're bigger than middle schools through the MSBA even as early as 2 years ago. They increased the middle school labs to equal the same size labs as high schools, even though it doesn't necessarily have the same curriculum. So we were hoping to incorporate prep spaces within the lab square footage, but the MSBA is sticking to the guidelines and making us put in dedicated prep rooms for those labs. So adding in a couple hundred square feet of prep rooms at the end of the day gets us up almost to 2,000 square feet back in just for the science rooms. The other big takeaway, though, from the comments so far is that upon the review, the MSBA appears to have approved or deemed the additional square footage in the core academic spaces, the classrooms, where we were slightly over the guidelines, as well as the third teaching station in the gym, the alternate gym, as eligible for reimbursement. So those were area, and I believe the sped spaces that were also over the MSBA guidelines. Again, that's very district specific, that the initial comments back that those all appear to be eligible. The auditorium, as discussed, was deemed ineligible for reimbursement, but it was a big win on the gym, and then the academic and sped spaces, which we somewhat expected.
Carly, do you have anything to add before I move on related to PSR FAS?
Nope, we thought it was very positive and encouraging.
Yeah, agreed. So we'll be preparing comments. The district's working on a couple of small comments related to the ed plan, and TAPE and Compass have a few items to return back, and then basically we're moving on. So
the board meeting is what, the 14th?
Yeah, so we'll get to that a little later in the presentation on the timeline, but yes, they'll be voting on it on the 14th of April. Does the committee have any questions about PSR and FAS before we move on? Okay, so we have quite a bit to cover on site design, so we'll get right into it. I wanted to just say how this is going to go down. We're going to start with the preliminary traffic report. This was included in the PSR, and with us tonight, the TAPE consultants with us tonight to discuss that is our Liz Pert and Melissa. Liz has been on site, interviewed principals, gone over how the bird school circulation works. So we're going to hear a presentation from her, and then we're going to hear from Chris from TAPE about the latest and greatest. There's some really nice drawings, site sections to understand kind of in another dimension the site. And then we also have Warner Larson with us tonight. Ty Johnson will do a presentation on some landscape items that we talked about earlier. And then I think we also have Niche Engineering, who are site civil. Chris mentioned that they might just be answering questions, but I think Will Schieffer's here from Niche.
Yeah, Will's here, and I think he has some graphics to share as well.
Okay.
Just to give general overall conceptual scope relative to what we're planning for civil design.
Okay.
So Charlie, we'll stick with that order, traffic, and then you want to go landscape site, or does it matter?
Sounds great.
Okay. So at this point, TAPE and their consultants are going to take over screen sharing with their drawings. So Patrick, I don't know if you enabled Liz Pert as a co-host. I also need Ty Johnson as a co-host.
I think Bridget's the host of this meeting.
Oh, she is? Sorry. So,
Give me a second, and I have to see everybody in the presentation. It takes me a little bit.
No worries. So we have Liz, and then if is Chris on with us yet?
He is not.
All right. Well, when he joins, he has some drawings, those site sections to share.
And if he doesn't join, we should just move right to landscape, which is, what we're really here for.
Okay. Liz is all set, and who else? Tony?
Liz, Ty Johnson from Warner Larson.
Okay.
And then Will Schieffer from Niche Engineering.
Okay. Liz is all set if she wants to start.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I have about 10 slides here that's going to, first of all, can everyone see the screen clearly, the cover sheet?
No.
No, user error there.
Yep.
How about now?
Yep.
Okay, very good. So I have about 10 slides here, which are going to be a summary of that traffic memo that was submitted, dated February 22nd. I will try to be quick so that we can get to the discussions of recommendations at the end of this. Just a quick question to the group or the chair of the group. How should we handle questions? Should I proceed through the 10 slides and then stop at the end, or are we going to do intermediate
I think
questions?
it might be best to wait until the end because it's different. It's difficult to see who wants to speak at any given moment. So I think we should wait till the end.
Understood. So with that, the transportation study that we conducted for the middle school project includes two primary focuses of analysis. One, the existing conditions, what is out there today, and then a future condition. So to analyze those existing conditions, we conducted site visits, as Tony mentioned, not only to the school, but also to our study intersections. We collect traffic count data, and I would note here that those were conducted within the last couple months, so they certainly reflect a COVID condition, and we are aware of that, obviously. Not only is general traffic lower, but the school itself is operating at lower student capacity. Luckily, we had a control intersection, which allowed us to take a historic count that was done pre-COVID, and then conduct a during COVID count and get a growth factor so that we could apply that growth factor to our counts to replicate, if you will, non-COVID conditions. And that factor was about 20%, meaning that the volumes out there today are approximately 20% lower than what pre-COVID conditions were. We also consulted with the Economic and Community Development Director, Ashley Clark, and Town Engineer Carl Baldoff to understand two primary things. One, the level and the specific projects, background projects that are going to occur in this area, regardless of the school. So that included actually 9 primarily residential developments in the area. And then from Carl, we got some very good information on the one traffic signal that's within our study area. We then use all that information to evaluate what we call level of service, which we'll get into in a bit more detail in a moment. But essentially, we grade intersections and intersection approaches by level of service A through F, which mean exactly what you think, A being best, F not being so good. We then look forward into the future condition, both with the project, with the new school, and without the new school. And we're looking at the year 2028. And I would note that that is simply a standard future year for traffic analysis. It has nothing to do directly with your construction schedule. Give me for a moment. There we go. So this is the study area for our traffic study. The U's in the circle represent the 3 unsignalized intersections that are part of our study area. The 1S at High Plain at Washington Street is our one signalized intersection. And the 3 purple lines along Washington Street indicate where we did 24-hour traffic counts so that we could understand what's happening there over the course of the day. At the circled intersections, we did what are called peak period traffic counts. So we looked at 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, so that we could then feed all that information, all that traffic count information into our traffic model. This is the site plan for the new proposed school. Key transportation features are that the plan will retain the existing site driveway at Washington Street into the school. All parents and staff would enter through this driveway. Parents during drop-off would circulate through, do the drop-off approximately here, and circulate back out to Washington Street. There's a new exclusive driveway to East Street, obviously not shown in its entirety here, that will service exclusively buses and vans. So, this is a really nice aspect of the project by separating the buses and the vans from the parent activity. It certainly works to enhance bus service and bus reliability. Key characteristics of the existing site and the future site. I'm sure you're familiar with these numbers. Students, approximately 400 today. In the future, we're looking at approximately 900 students. I would note that that includes growth. The existing population today is approximately 820 between the Byrd School and the Johnson School. We anticipate staff to increase from about 70 to 120. Buses, based on the current percent usage of the student population, would increase from approximately 10 to 23, and that includes both buses and vans. Parking spaces increasing from approximately 75 up to 150 for daytime use, and slightly more for event purposes. This table is showing, so we take all that information and we predict what will the new vehicle trips be at the middle school. And I would point out these are new vehicle trips. So we're assuming that the existing vehicle activity of staff and parents that's happening at the Byrd will remain generally the same, but we're going to see an increase. And that's what these numbers are showing. So we'll look at the morning peak hour and the afternoon peak hour. And we have the different categories of vehicles that we are anticipating. So just walking through each column. So for buses and vans, we're expecting 13 more bus trips in the morning, but those buses also need to leave. So in some, it's 26. So from a traffic point of view, we look at trips, not vehicles. So that represents 26 new vehicle trips in the morning. In the afternoon, the same number of bus and van trips. In the morning, we anticipate 23 new staff vehicle trips. Now, even though there are more staff members that will be arriving by car, this is what we're anticipating during that peak hour, because many staff do arrive before the peak hour, so they're already on site and parked. No staff would leave. In the afternoon, similar, no staff would be entering. We expect this many staff leaving for a total of 36. Now, this is the very important column. These are the estimated new parent drop-off and pickup trips for the morning peak hour and then in the afternoon. So in the morning, we're predicting 216 new vehicle trips arriving at the school, and of course they need to leave. So a total of 430 trips. That is a significant number of new vehicle trips. I would point out those are currently happening, but they're happening over at the Johnson School, right? They're not happening at this site, but they will in the future. In the afternoon, the parent activity will be much lower. And why is it lower? I mean, it's typical as to what's experienced at middle schools and high schools. There's more carpooling that occurs in the afternoon. More students walk in groups to various places. And of course, there are after-school activities, including athletics. So in total, morning peak hour, 480 new vehicle trips. Afternoon peak hour, approximately 200. We take that information of the new vehicle trips and we fold it into that level of service analysis that I mentioned earlier. I know there's a lot of letters on this screen, but I do want to walk through them in a bit of detail here in a moment. For signalized intersections, we focus on how the overall intersection is working and how each individual approach, each street approach is operating. For unsignalized intersections, where you arrive at a stop sign and wait for a gap in the traffic, Our concern is more the side street traffic that is being stopped and looking at their level of service and delay. I would point out that this table is a summary of what's in the memo. There are other characteristics that we look at in trying to analyze how an intersection is operating, and that includes queues, delays, and something called volume to capacity ratio. So just walking through this table. Morning peak hour, afternoon peak hour, the three conditions I explained today, future without the change to the bird school, and then the build condition with the combined school on site. So looking down this column for the morning peak hour, wherever you see an orange or a red letter, that's indicating that there's some type of delay. And I'm guessing that none of this will be a surprise to any of you who drive through these intersections. The morning peak hour at the signalized intersection of Washington at High Plain is just about approaching capacity at level of service D. And there's, for instance, a particular approach here, movement, that's at level of service F. But when you look holistically at the intersection, it's operating a level of service D. For the unsignalized intersections, you'll see a series of red moves here. And I'll focus in at Washington at Short and Poly for a moment. If you're traveling on Washington Street through this intersection, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, it's further north along Washington from the school. If you're on Washington Street, you don't stop. So your level of service is level of service A. You don't care what's happening on the side street. But those side street drivers are waiting quite a while, level service E or F, to make their turn onto Washington Street. And you'll see that same pattern reflected here at the middle school driveway at Washington Street. If you're on Washington Street, great. As you're waiting to get out of the intersection, you're experiencing level of service E today. And then further west along High Plain Street, the intersection of East Street at High Plain, the westbound move from High Plain, trying to turn left or right onto East Street in the morning, currently operates at level of service F. The other moves as you're traveling through are at a better level of service. I would note here that as we look into the future, you'll see a different configuration of results. And this is reflecting just at this intersection, the mitigation improvements that are being proposed by the developer of the former Walpole Woodworkers site. So there still will be a level service F at this location. However, the improvements proposed there will improve safety, particularly for pedestrians trying to get across this intersection. So the intent of those improvements is not to reduce vehicle delay, it's to improve safety. So kind of working my way back up this column, right? Those additional developments, those 9 residential developments I talked about for the future, those are factored into this column. And you start to see a little bit of a change from orange to red. But as you move into the build condition, this is where we see a significant increase, again, with those 480 odd new trips coming to the site, where we start to push a lot of the approaches into level service E and F. I mean, this is still an F here, but I will say it's a higher, longer delay under the build condition than it is under the existing condition. You see a similar pattern in the afternoon peak hour, not quite as many red and orange letters, and that's because the background traffic in the area is lower at 2 in the afternoon, which is when this afternoon peak hour is occurring, 2 to 3, as opposed to this morning peak hour, which of course includes both the school arrival period and the typical morning commuter peak period. So in summary, all these study intersections that we looked at will experience additional delays and queues in the build condition with the combined school. In particular, the queues along the school driveway, the single school driveway at Washington Street, will be significant. And that's particularly during that morning peak period when the volumes are higher. So what can we do about that? I guess at the outset, I would point out that, Walpole is not unique in having significant school-related congestion around schools, right? It happens everywhere. There's a big influx of parents right before drop-off, and most people in town know to avoid that particular school area for about 15 minutes while that happens. However, what can we do to try and make this better? And I will say that there is not one single solution that will solve the conditions that we are forecasting under the build condition. Looking at it from two sides, one demand management and then the other being actual infrastructure improvements. From a demand management point of view, you want to try and reduce those number of parent vehicle trips. So one way to do it is to have more before school programs so that students are spread out over a longer period of time as they arrive at the school. The second measure is to try and accommodate more students on buses. Currently, the bus usage is approximately 50%. I think it might be 52%. If you could get all, I realize this is an extreme, but if you could get all the new Johnson Middle School students on a bus, as opposed to having them arrive via a parent vehicle, the traffic impacts would be significantly less. And that's where that 75% number is coming from. If you could get all of those new students on buses, the traffic impacts that we are talking about would be significantly less. But understanding and knowing that that may not be reality, what can we do operationally to try and make this better? As is shown on the plan, we want to include a right turn exit lane on the school driveway, the primary school driveway, to Washington Street. That'll just help the right turning traffic move more freely from the traffic that wants to turn left to go north up Washington Street. And they typically need to wait longer than a right turn. We think it's very important to assess a more formal drop-off pickup area along East Street. While our traffic model for that build condition assigned all the parent trips to the driveway on Washington Street, in reality, we know that parents are going to use or continue to use East Street to drop off some students. And as a way of trying to introduce other options for traffic to reduce this congestion, we think that's an important aspect to further consider at this point. And in combination with that, also looking at a exit only driveway for autos to East Street. So we have the bus van driveway, which we on the team believe should remain an exclusive bus van driveway. This would be a second pathway that would get you from the center of campus out to East Street. And what that does is it introduces porosity in the site such that not all your vehicles need to leave via the one driveway on Washington Street. And looking at Washington Street itself, it is a very likely candidate to have a traffic signal at the end of the driveway at Washington Street. However, as much as we all might think that sounds like a great idea and let's go ahead and consider it, the traffic volumes there need to meet what's called a traffic warrant. So we would need to further study the traffic volumes to understand if in fact it would meet the warrant for a traffic signal. And with that, that's the end of the presentation. And I know that was probably longer than 10 minutes, so I apologize.
Do we have any questions or comments from the committee? No questions or comments?
No, I do.
All right, Mr. Conroy, thank you.
Okay. First, excuse me, I want to point out, as I said before, and I'm sure the consultant didn't know it, and I'm on the planning board and very familiar with the Pulte intersection that they're supposed to do, that you alluded to on the Eastern High Plain, and that is based upon after their fourth building is built. They've only done two. They're not exactly selling like hotcakes down there, so that could or could not be a reality at some point in the future. So it could happen, but it could happen in 2024 or maybe 2028. So that is something that you can't necessarily count on. The next thing, I understand the traffic, and I'm sure you understand that Route 27 is a major thoroughfare for commuters. So isn't Washington Street, and so isn't East Street. So basically, you got a school surrounded by 3 in the morning. The afternoon, yeah, I understand that is, but I know you've looked at that. One of the questions that I have that needs to be looked at is that this is fine when the school is built, but this is scheduled for a 40-month building period. We're not going to have all this stuff in place during that time, and that's going to have to be looked at too, because 40 months is a long time to go with a lot of problems. If you were in front of me on my planning board, I'd say, okay, yeah, 40 months from now it'd be built, but what are you going to do from the 40 month, from 0 to 40? That needs to be addressed as far as parking. You know, we can't ignore that because that will be an issue, and 40 months is a long time. The other thing, and I know as a consultant you understand it, is we all know rainy days will just boost this thing right out of control because of the way the parents want to bring their kids if you have rainy days or cold days. The other thing that caught my eye, and not necessarily traffic, because I know we're going to have a queuing problem coming out of Washington, taking a left. I think we all realize, so I'm not going to hop on that. But this is more of a question, I guess, for the designers and then everybody else is, we want, right now, what is desired in here, what's in here is a 600-seat auditorium. And what I heard was we only have 212 spaces for event parking. That doesn't work if you're going to have a 600-seat auditorium. And that's not necessarily traffic, but I just picked that up. And if Brian or whomever, Tony or somebody can allude to that, not necessarily on this traffic, but later on, is it's out of proportion. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy. Would anybody like to respond to Mr. Conroy?
We do have a new slide that Chris will show later that does recap the revised parking and some strategies for additional parking. So let's just table that until Chris talks. That one point.
Can I interrupt though, to your point, sir, about the 600-seat auditorium? Oftentimes those are used for, performances or school band performances, etc. And you'll have multiple people, perhaps 2 parents arriving in a car along with the student. So you get a much higher auto occupancy at those events than, say, your one staff member arriving in one vehicle. So, we often see upwards of 3 people per vehicle for an event like that. So I would just offer that traffic perspective as you go into the design discussion later.
Mark, if I could respond. And I understand that, but 212 is a 3-to-1 ratio, and that doesn't include the support staff or anybody who's there. At the high school, we actually had 400 spaces we built there back 20 years ago for student parking, plus the rest of it. And there's talk that everybody wants our events, the town meeting, everything up there. So when you start wanting to do that, you're already at 150 members, and then add everything else that goes along with it. All I'm saying is 212 seems a little bit short on that. But the one question is, if somebody can answer from the designers and Compass, is we need to think about from 0, the day you put the first shovel in, until the day this is all open, is how the traffic, because that will be probably what everybody remembers the most.
Yeah,
This is Chris from Cafe. Yeah, we've done that, and we have a logistics plan, an initial logistics plan that we've, I think, shown maybe previously and had. We can bring it up again, but we have thought through what those logistics look like, and of course, those will have to be fine tuned as we move further along. But we have some initial thoughts on that.
Thank you, Mr. Weston. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
David does have his hand up, Mark.
All right, Mr. Salvatore. Thank you.
David, you're on mute just if you're trying to talk.
Okay, here we go. Two things. I like the idea of the exit only to East Street, but then I wonder where they're going to go. So some will go left, which is fine, but some are going to go to right, and then they're going to end up at Polly Lane and Short, which is already a horrible intersection. But I think there is discussions about Polly and Short as at some point in the future needing to be a signalized intersection. So that may help things. So I definitely think that's a good thing to explore as far as having, because I think what people who are going to go towards that intersection will realize that rather to get out onto East Street as a right turn and get up to Polly and Short would be much less stressful or less time than making that left back onto Washington Street. So that may be a good solution to help ease that up a little bit. And while I think your assessment of the East High Plains Street is for safety, I think some of the design also will help it be a better intersection in the sense that the traffic traveling eastward east towards High Plain on 27 now is going to have a 90-degree turn there instead of what it has now, in which people don't really have to slow down very much to make that turn. So that people that are trying to make a left turn from High Plain Street to East Street don't see that car slowing down enough in order to make that jump to, I for one don't necessarily trust the blinkers if I don't see the car slowing down. So there may be a modicum of improvement in that intersection if if that eventually gets fixed. And I understand what Mr. Conroy is saying about the, it only clicks in if they build the fourth building or the fifth building or whatever it is. But hopefully the improve, with that and Polly Lane, see a little bit of improvement there. And to Mr. Conroy's point about the construction, definitely needs to be discussed during that. But we also are looking at, not having the Johnson people coming at that point. So we're looking at the current numbers rather than the future numbers. As far as the bus, I mean, I think, you may have more people, certainly the people that currently bring their kids to Johnson that are in the nearby neighborhoods may be less willing to go across town. So you may have an increase in the bus traffic there, which would, as you said, help the situation. But it certainly, like you said, it's a tough. There's no solution. I don't see any of these as solving the problem, just mitigating it. And I think it's still going to be a horrible situation for those 20 minutes, in the morning and afternoon, just like it is at the high school. So that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Mark, can I make a comment? This is Chris.
Yes, Mr. Watson.
So Mark, just to reiterate what we're talking about for the road to east, I just kind of wanted to talk about that while this is up. Is a roadway down the south side of the site there, and as a project team, what we were tossing around when Liz says assess that condition, there's lots of ways we can assess that, but one of the things we were talking about was making that exit only and right turn only onto East Street. So there's no left turns. And the at least the first conversation we had about it was that a lot of the new trips coming from the Johnson School area might be returning this way and going up Plimpton Street and not hitting the Shorten Poly Road. And that's one reason to make it right turn only, and they can just do like a big loop coming through. And so we're looking at that. I just kind of wanted to highlight that what the spot that we're talking about is sort of along the property line between the existing baseball field and out to East Street. And you know, we'll look at all avenues of easing that we can, but I think that was one of the conversations there. So just to put a little more clarity on that statement that Liz made.
Blesson, does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Mark, Dave has his hand up again.
All right, Mr. Salvatore, please.
Okay, with that added information, I for one avoid Plimpton. I don't like going under that bridge. I don't like how narrow that road is, and I don't know that people are going to love going that way. I think people are going to want to go at least to Kendall, which is the left-hand turn, to get back into that area.
Okay.
So, and I don't know that a left turn out of there isn't so bad at that time of the morning. I haven't spent a lot of time in that neighborhood during those hours, but I don't think that section of East Street is too bad.
Okay.
But the other thing is, it won't work to share the bus lane on the way out.
No, we batted around the conversation on this, but it's from there's no, it's not a good way to connect those. And then also you want to keep the buses and the cars separate because of safety issues. And you're going to have the buses arriving at almost the same time as cars. And then you have one car that wants to go across there to get out, and they have to wait for the buses, and it just will bottleneck the entire operation. And so the goal is to keep the cars moving, and by making two separate roads, you can do that safely between buses and cars. And so, so we as a project team and designers don't think that that's advisable to connect the two if you're going to the length of separating them.
That's fine. I know at Johnson, actually, we weren't allowed into the circle until the buses all left, which was an interesting thing. So
Right.
until the buses were all gone, we weren't allowed in. So I wonder if, possibly after all the buses are gone, if there was a connection that could be made, you could allow it. But
yeah, and I think we'll keep that on the table we'll write it down and keep it in our conversations and come back to the committee with some more thoughts on this. We're just batting around ideas at the moment.
Sure. Yeah, because I think the bus students actually come in a little earlier at Johnson and leave earlier than the non-bus students, and that's something that could be done both to, as in the presentation, reduce the spread out the times where people are coming in, and also make it less horrible all at once. But
that's a good point. Thanks, Dave.
Mr. Fisher, I think you had a hand a moment ago.
I had a quick question on, probably to Elizabeth. The number of trips in the morning versus the afternoon, I think it was almost 50% less. And if you could just explain that.
Sure. So I'm guessing you're referring to this.
Yes, that's the slide. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is based on observations at the school, granted, during COVID, and they were adjusted to reflect non-COVID conditions. But what really happens in the afternoon, there is a spreading out of trips because of after-school activities that keep students on campus longer, so they're not being picked up or bussed out until after this peak hour. There's more carpooling that we've observed at school, not only at this school, but we see it at other middle schools and high schools You know, you say, hey, can you bring my child home since you're going to be there anyway? And we also see more walking activity from students. They group together and they'll walk somewhere in a group. So all those things combined tend to reduce the amount of traffic that's generated in the afternoon. And I would say, even if this number were higher, you know, right now we're estimating 71, even if it were higher, that background traffic of the mid-afternoon is actually lower. So the impact of those, what could be, say, maybe even 100 trips, wouldn't be as significant as that morning period.
Thank you. And also the same comment as David, you know, the right turn only out of East Street to force people down Plimpton Street to a one-lane bridge, just not a fan of.
Yeah, if I can just comment quickly on that. I mean, those were all good comments. I'm going to go back to that map that I had up on the screen. And I don't know, can you all see my cursor when I move it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. You know, traffic has a way of finding its equilibrium, right? So if we were to put an exit here and allow lefts and rights, you know, not everyone's going to avoid Clinton because of the constraint, because they're going to start to weigh that constraint or issue against what they might encounter down this way. So traffic kind of finds its own way, right? We might want to try and direct folks a certain way, but as long as it's a legal move, people will find their way to their destination.
Any other questions or comments? All right, hearing none, Mr. Jarvis or Mr. Pena, you want to take over again?
I think we're going to either Chris or Warner Larson next.
Yeah, Chris, what do you?
Yeah, and I apologize for being late, but I think we're going to go to Ty Johnson from Warner Larson. I think it's Ty who's presenting.
Yep.
So Ty, if you share your screen, and I don't know if you want to introduce the rest of your team, Charlie. I mean, Ty.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Ty Johnson with Warner Larson Landscape Architects. I'm associate principal. I'm representing our firm tonight. Not even sure if there's, I think there may be a few other folks listening in, but I'll be the main talker tonight. So thank you for having us. And I'd like to just show the overall sort of a pulled out view of the site. Can everyone see the screen now, which shows the white footprint within the property? And Liz, thank you for describing the circulation of the buses and the cars, how that works. That'll save me a little bit of time. I do want to touch on a couple other items, and I know, you know, vehicular circulation and parking are always some of the main items when it comes to doing the site planning for a property like this, but also obviously phasing this in with the existing building in operation at the same time. A lot of things to consider, a lot of different moving parts. But what I can appreciate about this, about where we're at now with the design, is the car queue and the bus queue on this property are great. They're a great asset to have because they're so long that you can fit, you know, more than 90% of the schools out there. You have on-property queuing space to accommodate dozens of buses, dozens and dozens of cars. And I know it's still legit. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but compared to other schools, it's a great start. So I just want to have a couple slides here. I mean, obviously we talked about the buses are coming in off East Street. That's in blue. They circle around and turn back. Cars are coming off Washington Street in yellow. Likewise, they'll be dropping off at the closest point to the building, to the entrance right here, and then moving on their way. So the queue space can go back quite a bit. I do want to talk about emergency access in the design. So a couple things have come up through feasibility and to the point we are today. Obviously, having maximum emergency vehicle access for fire trucks, ambulances, police vehicles are important. So one thing we're certainly doing is allowing for a connection between the main parking lot and the bus drop off. And I'll show you a closer up view, but basically there will be a paved area that would allow the vehicles to move between these two areas. Now, whether there's a gate or bollards or a curb, we're still looking at sort of the best choice there. It would certainly be for just authorized vehicles, so we wouldn't want to invite normal traffic. What's nice about this is having a separate bus and car queue, a number of benefits, but one nice benefit is that you do create a nice pedestrian connection between the main entrance of the building out to the fields. So I'll show you that in a little more detail in a second. Now, the emergency access around the back of the building is obviously going to be a challenge. And so what I'm showing here in red is you have full access for large fire apparatus. In blue represents a 12-foot wide paved access. So that would be more appropriate for smaller vehicles, police cruisers, or possibly ambulances could move through on the blue dash line. But the red would be sort of the limits of where a large fire truck with a ladder would go. And so, those vehicles would need to back out of those areas. They could pull up and then back out into the main circulation. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. One other point I want to make is the building location, as I touched on that. On this slide, you can see the red dashed line. I think most people are familiar with this plan. The red dashed line represents the existing building. The new building is, for a lack of better term, shoehorned in there between the property line and the existing building. And so the other thing you need to consider is not just access around it, but the elevation of the new building. And so we're proposing an elevation, it's approximately 4 to 5 feet higher than the existing building. So what that does is it minimizes the retaining wall along the back, and that retaining wall would be along here, if everyone can see my cursor, the little hand. And that wall is about 5 to 8 feet high, 8 feet on the max side. So you would be creating a wall just off the property line. And we're also looking at how much cut and fill and balancing the earthwork we can do when you put that new building in. So there's a lot of drivers for what determines the finished floor of that new building. But we think we have it in a good spot now. It is higher than the existing one. So pedestrian circulation is an important aspect here. We know that, we talk about cars, but also people. And so what we have planned right now is continuing to use the existing walkway through the woods from Washington Street, but with improvements. So we're talking about widening it, possibly clearing a little bit of the forest next to it, and selective clearing the low understory, and then connecting that walkway around the side. And then where the cars pull up, there'll be a nice, generous, wide circulation area for drop off for students to go into the entrance of the building. But we also want to make sure we have accessibility down to the fields. I'm just going to zoom in a tiny bit here. So that's what you're seeing over here with these sort of crisscross walkways, and then connecting into the existing walkway that's running along the southern property line that connects out to East Street. So we're going to continue. That's going to be an existing to remain condition. You're going to connect into that and then have accessibility up through the parking into the school and out to Washington, as well as across the side of the parking lot to the central pedestrian zone in the middle here, which has, here you can see the emergency access. And obviously there's a little hill there we're thinking about, you know, how's that parking gonna transition to the hillside? And so that's why you see sort of these long pathways that would be fully accessible under 5% slope. Let's see. So we are including several outdoor landscaping sort of spaces for outdoor learning, casual seating areas for small gatherings, as well as a school garden. So those are all shown on the plan. I think they're, at this point, you know, we haven't designed them. They're more spatially focused about how much space you might need for these things and how much pavement versus landscape versus lawn and trees and so forth. So that's sort of, that is a diagram, essentially a concept diagram as we kick off SD, showing those spaces. And we'll get into a little more, you know, the purpose of SD is to confirm the size, the space, and the price, the cost, basically, of all these items that we can afford or not. Outside to the north of the cafeteria would be an outdoor seating area with a little amphitheater that would sort of accommodate, pick up the grade, so work with the grade, so that could serve as casual outdoor seating or a small group gathering as well. And let me get into the parking now. That'll be my last topic here, I think, that I want to touch on. And I know that's always a contentious issue. Right now, as Liz mentioned, there's 212 spaces max, and we've broken them up into a couple different categories. The daily parking include all the paved surfaces that are come off Washington Street, but also there are 10 spaces reserved sort of up beyond the service area, which I should point out, by the way, is right here. So those 10 spaces to be used by staff. We were thinking maybe the early arrivers, because the bus loop itself, while it's restricted for use during school hours, after school hours, it would be a community asset where people could go and park in that bus loop. So what you're seeing here is we actually show 7 parallel parking spaces around this loop. Now, you wouldn't want to fill it up because you still need to maintain emergency access. But likewise, the East Street driveway, and I'm going to flip back to this one, and zoom in here, would have, we're showing 15 parking spaces along, these are parallel spaces along this driveway, which also could be used for the fields or an event, an after school event at the auditorium and so forth. And you know, we're treading carefully here because we know that these fields need to remain in use. They're very popular with the community, and so, you know, adding this roadway is obviously going to have some impact, but we believe we've come up with a solution where there's minimal impact by hugging this property line with this driveway, and you know, this large baseball field, you know, the center field is nice and deep, so that's where we're putting the parallel parking. And then you have a rectangular field that would need to be shifted a little bit to accommodate sort of this side slope as this bus loop comes up. So we've looked at all these things in detail already. Not to say that, you know, in schematic design, we're going to keep going with the design, but that's where we're at with those items. And so field event parking on this diagram is 22, which represents 7 spaces around the bus loop, and then the 15 spaces I just discussed. And then the last overflow parking, which at this point, we're not even sure if we would be paved or not, but could be. But this would be pull off parking. It could be stabilized lawn, it could be gravel, it could be paved. You could have 11 parking spaces parallel along this driveway. Also, we have an open field where we could choose to use that as overflow space. At this point, we've not shown, we preserved this beautiful wooded area between Washington Street and the school up to this point. And, that's obviously a very important thing. It's a beautiful feature. And, if additional parking were necessary, once there's a consensus on how many spaces are actually required, we can look at sort of filling in some of these spots, and still preserving that asset. I think that covers most of what I wanted to talk about. So I appreciate you listening, and if there's any questions, obviously, happy to take them.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I don't see anybody. Very good.
Mark, I just couldn't find my hand on there.
Okay. Yep. Ms. Gallivan? Yep.
Thank you. I probably should have asked this one prior, but have our police department and fire department had input to these decisions, or these, not decisions, suggestions?
Yes, we've had a meeting with many of the town's DPW, public health, and public safety officials, and that's actually where the access across the middle there to connect the bus and the cars came from.
Okay.
They requested that, and other things too that we've been working to accommodate. So,
Nancy, we'll be having subsequent meetings, at least one more with them as we develop the design. We actually have that in the work plan, another sit down with police and fire.
And they also sent us the specs on their apparatus and turning radiuses too. So.
Okay, yeah, I kind of assumed so, but I didn't want to assume. I have two other questions. You're talking about, and I see it marked that there's a student entrance, but how many different ways are there to enter and exit this building?
There's the main entrance, which is where student entrance is, and then each wing has another potential entrance in the middle of it, and then there's the annotate here. So there's the main entrance, and then there's one at each end.
Okay.
And then there's an event entrance as well. So I think there's at least 4 on front, 1 on the side, and there likely will be something over here as well to service this outdoor learning, but I wouldn't really consider that a major access point. But those other ones are the ones right now.
There'll be egress doors all around, Nancy.
Yeah.
I assumed that, but when I just saw one entrance marked, I thought that would be a problem, but okay. And then my last question is about the roads that you're talking about cutting in, at least the one road going out to East Street and potentially a second one. What would be the timing on that? What would be like the soonest that you would wanna cut that road?
Thinking on at least the bus loop would be that would be one of the first things that would be completed or at least roughed in. Right now, this project we've been talking about going construction manager at risk. One of the benefits of that delivery method is that we'd be able to do early release packages. We could do an early site package, which would mean we could procure the site contractor ahead of some other contractors and get started on that scope of work sooner. And the thinking is that that would serve as the construction road during the project to alleviate as much as possible of any construction traffic in the normal school drop-off traffic coming off of Washington Street.
Okay, so, but there's no chance that it would affect fall sports. this coming fall, correct?
Oh, no,
No.
yeah,
No. It would be a year from at the soonest?
yes, it would be the end of 2022 at the soonest.
Okay.
Most likely, but that schedule would still to be determined.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure that we give people time, when the people that might have to adjust.
Oh, yeah, that's not until end of 22 at the earliest.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gallivan. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Hey, Chris, before we move on, can you just draw one of your awesome red lines on where the East Street one-way traffic? It's a long path.
The concept is this, but we've not spoken with Ty and his team about this yet. It just came up on late Thursday afternoon. And, you know, so obviously the parking hasn't adjusted to that or whatever, but the concept is if we could sneak a roadway here that's one lane, one way.
Yeah, single lane, yeah.
Then we might be able to put another relief valve for the traffic up at the intersection. And so that's the theory, but we need to keep chasing that and thinking and designing around it.
Yep.
I just sneak in here. I would also think that perhaps you could look at either gravel apron or something to also get some cars off of East Street for events on the field.
On East Street proper?
No, on the new road, the red.
This road here, yeah. Yeah, it just depends on space, I think, and that's, we're gonna have to carefully study that and make sure that it works. But you're right, we could stabilize the edges and
yeah, the line looks further away than I expected from the third baseline, but I don't know if it's an actual.
Well, there's a dugout currently there, and there's some other infrastructure running along that line. So we need to try and stay away from. But again, this is like, you're the first people to hear of it, so we're trying to chase it out and see what we can do.
Yeah, even if it's a tight squeeze, but you can just get some cars over there, it would be great.
Do we have any other questions or comments from the committee? All right, hearing none. Mr. Jarvis and Mr. Pena, do we want to move on to our next speaker?
Yeah, I think we'll move on to Will Schaefer from Niche Engineering. They're the civil engineers, and I don't suspect this conversation would take that long, but they've done some work, and I want to give Will the chance to show their current thinking on some of the utility infrastructure that we're looking at. And then after Will goes, I will show you a couple slides of further development that we've been doing. So,
sure. Just let me know if you're seeing my screen. It's going to be real short, yep. Pretty much just one slide going over what we're thinking as far as utility connections for this project. One major concern, or just at least from a utility standpoint, we're definitely going to be increasing impervious area on this site with this proposed site plan. So stormwater management is going to be key from a utility perspective. We're going to obviously have to conform with Mass DEP rules, so we can't increase the amount of water that's going to be coming off of the school with an increase in impervious. Usually the way we mitigate that, and you see that with several of these areas scattered around, as infiltration. We'll be using underground infiltration, targeting above ground BMPs where possible. It is a tight site, and we are grading pretty significantly. So the areas that are available above ground may be limited, but we'll be targeting our management in these underground areas that are kind of scattered around through the site plan. For sanitary, we're going to be making use of an existing connection from the school that kind of goes underneath the fields. For right now, we're showing several connections to remain flexible and also go around the footprint of the existing school so as to be able to construct these while that school remains up and not have anything interfere with our proposed services. And doing that work before the existing school comes down. connecting into this existing sanitary line that then continues across the field and into the infrastructure that's on East Street. And for the water, we'd be proposing a loop that kind of connects between the systems that are in Washington Street and East Street to provide redundancy for the school. It can be shut off from one side and still keep service from a main that's on the other side. Loop that essentially continues along one of the roadway loops through the school and links up with the public infrastructure that's located in each. And that's pretty much all that I do have to present. That's our perspective on the drainage plan, or on the utility plan. Drainage is something that's going to be top of our mind as we're moving through the design for this project.
Thank you, Mr. Schrieffer. Mr. Blesson.
Okay.
Okay.
Questions on that, Mark?
Anybody have any questions or comments? I don't see any, unless anybody wants to interject. Mr. Jarvis, Mr. Pena, do we want to move on?
Yeah, I think we're good. Chris, you have updates?
Yep. I will share my screen now. Let's see. All right. Okay. So we wanted to talk through, let me get rid of this little, everybody can see my slides, okay?
Yep.
Okay, so we just wanted to talk through a little bit of, as we develop schematic design, some of the envisioned character of the middle school. And, you know, nothing here is set in stone. The pictures you see are of recent and past projects of TAPEs. And so we're just sort of reiterating that some of the interior spaces and the important things that we're looking for are really around connectivity, flexibility, having that nature element, that the biophilia and universal design elements are all going to be key to how we start to think about the organization and design elements within the building. And also, just so you hear me say it and reiterate that the goal for this project will be very budget-minded solutions and ideas that the first cost is you know, not extravagant, but we also want to balance that with longevity and less maintenance costs. So there's durability factored into that as well. So so those are some of the interior spaces. Some of the exterior spaces are shown here, and these are spaces that we've worked with Warner Larson on in the past, or I should say Warner Larson designed as part of buildings that we've done in the past, and they're fantastic open spaces and natural environments. And I think some of the things we want to accomplish are listed there on the left, and you know, to note that we want to have things that are you know, that are maintenance friendly again, and don't require a lot of you know, extravagant care and things like that for your outdoor spaces. And then we also want to make sure that as people approach the building, that it's clear, and that there's some shelter provided, and that there's scale and space created along those places. So you've seen a lot about site plans today. Here is a drawing that shows the actual floor plan layered into those drawings. Slightly outdated version of what Ty just showed you, but the sort of key thing to note here is that we're actually planning some spots in the site plan for future expansion, which are these red dashed boxes on the end of these two wings. And so while we're not designing that, we're actually thinking about it in terms of infrastructure and you know, layouts for site and things like that. The current floor plans are looking like this right now. Again, no major changes since the last time you saw this or heard of it. I guess the one key change, which may have come up earlier, if not, it's going to come up in a minute, but is from the MSBA's comments to the PSR and the FAS is that they're requiring that we meet the base standards for the science classrooms. So we tried to go to them and tell them we could live with a smaller science lab and no prep rooms, but they said, no, you have to build those. So we designed those back into the floor plans. And so, you know, it was a savings of 2,000 square feet roughly. And so that space is now back into the program and represented in these floor plans. This is an early sort of idea on how the building might look up on the site itself, and some massing thoughts around that. And I know some parts of it kind of get washed out, but the point is that it's a 3-story building on this site, and it's sort of positioned right in the middle along with the trees, and it doesn't overpower the scale of the site. And so we're just trying to really take as many shots as we can to verify we're moving in the right direction in terms of site and massing. Here's some site sections. In the bottom right, you can kind of see an animation happening. And so if you watch that through each of its cycles, it's showing some of the sun orientation. And so this was just to talk through how all of the classroom wings are ideally oriented toward, you know, with the long axis relative to solar orientation. And so that's what that little moving animation is about. But the rest of this slide is really about site sections. And so the existing site is on the top left side, and you can kind of see where the site starts to flatten out is right where your parking lot is. And that's where we proposed for the new building to be. And Ty mentioned about the elevation of that floor plate relative to the existing school, the middle floor of the existing school. And then the bottom site section is taken just a few yards back from the one that cuts through the school, and kind of goes further up the hill towards Washington Street. And I think that this one is helping people to see the sort of site as it's sloping out. And, you know, on the right-hand side up towards Washington, you have that whole end of the site is really every 100 feet you go, you've raised 7 feet up in the air. And then when you get to the middle of the site where we're talking about putting the building, you can see that it sort of flattens out with a little bit of undulation there. And so, so that bottom section helps clarify some of the topography that's going on that may not be exactly noticeable when you're on site itself. I think I've presented these diagrams previously, but these are just some of the key aspects again, and we've talked a lot about car traffic and access, which is the first left image there. The middle image being the way the building can break down between public and academic or school and public use, and then the team structure in the wings. And then this is just a little breakdown of how the teams could actually work, knowing that, you know, some of the designations of these classrooms may be different than what I'm writing, but these are the basic building blocks of how that works. And then the vertical connectivity and structure between arts and music and gyms and media. And then on the right, the integration of special education to the rest of the building and floor plates. And then on the bottom right is a little table that talks about the program variants to the MSBA guidelines. And really you can see the biggest one there is the other category, which is your auditorium and extra gym. So that's a whirlwind of what I have. And as far as my updates go, and I think Brian and Tony, that rounds out the design team's sort of conversations for tonight.
Max, any questions on anything from Chris? Back on the floor plans. All right. Jack, you have a question? Might be on mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have a question. One of the comments that you made as you went through this was, as far as the entrance was concerned, you wanted to make it very clear and apparent where the entrance was as kind of a, as you approach the building. But the main entrance or the main way that you're going to get to the building, you're going to actually arrive at the building at the back corner of the building and have to then drive around to the front. And the parking area and the turnaround for cars coming in isn't even going to be in front of the main entrance of the building. It's going to be set off to the side. So I'd ask you to take a look at that. I agree with you that you really want to make it very clear where you're going to have where you're going to enter the building and kind of be, this is I won't say a grand entrance, but you're going to have an entrance that's very clear and shows very clearly where people should enter, what the building's all about. But you're approaching the building from the back left-hand corner, and then you're driving around to the front, but you never even really get close to the front entrance. You're in the parking lot set off to the side. So I'd ask you to take a look at that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Jack, that was one of the comments from the MSBA as well. It's just a little more integration with that entrance to the front landscape, as well as the parking, and then also making sure that the accessible entrance has some covering and weather protection as well, because obviously people are getting dropped off and finding their way to the front entrance.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting at all that you completely redesign the front entrance, but it may be more of a landscaping and if you will, how you're going to lay out the parking lot a little bit differently. So I just ask that you take a look at that, because what you don't want people coming in and just saying, wait a minute, what is this? And not knowing, not really understanding or getting an appreciation of what the building's all about, because you're looking at a back corner with just a wall of windows or a brick wall, as opposed to seeing the entrance, which should be inviting. So I'll stop now.
Yeah, understood.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy. Mr. Jarvis?
Any other questions for Chris or floor plans? All right, we'll try to wrap this up and just remind you where we are on the timeline. So with the green bar into March, the goal is to submit the schematic design report to the MSBA by the first week in July. The MSBA's board meeting for the PSR is going to be April 14th. They'll formally move us into SD, but as you can tell, we've already well started on that. The MSBA board meeting is the 25th of August, which will lead us into the run-up to town meeting and the town vote. Working through the deliverables for schematic design, again, roughly 30% of the design will be completed at the end of schematic design with those deliverables there. The big takeaways being the project budget, the construction cost estimate, which will then be used in negotiations with the MSBA to set up the maximum reimbursement, which we talked through at the last meeting. We'll have a project schedule that we'll start to design to, as well as a construction schedule, and all that gets submitted to the MSBA by July 7th. So the end of June will be very busy with updates to all the town boards and committees and a final vote by this committee to submit the package by July 7th. And just another update, some of you might be aware, we have another community forum targeted for next Wednesday night, April 7th. We did get a mailer out to folks in town through the town's contacts. I think every resident, every door should be receiving the save the date mailer, just to get more of an audience, hopefully, for this community forum. So we'll have an update with a lot of the things you saw tonight, as well as a summary of costs and potential tax impacts that we talked through at the last meeting. All of these meetings, everything's posted on the website, but again, just trying to drive some more traffic. Now that this project is getting, into the stages of getting close to town meeting this fall, is trying to get more people aware of what's going on, answer as many questions as possible, and hear any concerns or issues that people might have. So that's out there. If you hear about it, that's next Wednesday. We're putting together a presentation and presenting that. And then Tony, want to run through, this is the work plan we saw at the last meeting. Tony, I don't know if you just want to zoom in on what's up for next few meetings.
Our next meeting is April 13th. Again, next week is the community forum, and then we're back together. In the work plan, we've scheduled to not have such a whirlwind tour by Chris on the plans. As we talked about tonight, there are some tweaks that we've made since the last time we kind of reviewed them in depth, namely around science rooms. So those will be updated, and we could talk a little bit more about that. And Chris does have a really nice bathroom design that I think everyone will like, so we can go over just parts and pieces of the floor plans that are developed now that are obviously things that we talked about in the past. So I don't know if Chris, you'll have an additional massing diagram or something with exterior elevations. Just, I noticed that your model does have fenestration now, so we could probably review like what areas have windows and what don't. We'll also talk about sustainability a little bit. We had our target lead scorecard back in the day when we submitted for PSR. I don't think much of that's changed, but we can go through that. On the 27th, it'll be a longer meeting on April 27th. It'll be similar to tonight, where we'll have some consultants with related to MEP systems. So there's a little bit of work to do around there. But next meeting won't be as maybe as lengthy as this one. And then we'll move into a really more condensed set of meetings through May and June related to budget and the submission. So that's just to give sort of a look ahead of where we're going. So, you know, next week will be the community forum focus, and then we'll have sort of a lighter meeting to start April, and then we're gonna get into systems here, and then a lot of stuff to do with budget and the submission.
The other thing I'll add to that, at the end of April, we want to start the conversation on delivery method. So right now, as we've mentioned before, and what's carried in the cost estimates is a construction manager at risk, CM at risk, versus a design build approach. So we'll get into that conversation late April as we move towards the end of schematic design. Because if we are going the CM route, we want to get those wheels turning so that we could get a CM on board right after town meeting to help with the design phase. They offer services during the design phase regarding constructability and estimating and planning, especially around phasing and things of that nature related to traffic and construction entrance and timing. So we'll start that conversation in April, and that'll be an ongoing conversation for several months.
We do have some questions, I think from Jack and Susan. Mark, if you want to name those now.
All right, Ms. Lawson, if you would speak, please.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify the meeting scheduled for April 27th, I believe has been rescheduled because that's the night of the public hearing.
That's right. I'm sorry. I think this might be an outdated one that's
okay.
Here. I apologize.
Was it 5-4, Tony?
Yes, it has moved to 5-4. I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you.
Just making sure you're paying attention, Susan, that's all. You got an A for tonight.
This is an older one. I'm sorry. That's my fault.
Okay.
And who else wanted to speak?
Jack Fisher.
Mr. Fisher, yes.
Just a quick one, thinking ahead a little bit. One of the things I was going to suggest to Jimmy that you may want to consider is to have a little bit of time allocated at town meeting to under, I think it's Article 2, where you do the committee reports. Have this committee give a brief summary of where we are on this. Town meeting doesn't like surprises, and so if you can keep them apprised of what's going on, I think it would be well worth it.
So, Jack, on my end, I know Mark Breen and I had talked about doing a video like we've done in the past for these remote town meetings on the football field. So, Mark was going to prepare a presentation that was going to be taped for that.
That's great. I think that's important. Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
Nancy has her hand up.
Nancy.
Sorry, yeah. Just wondering, looking at the next couple of meetings, if we've heard from neighbors who want to talk to us, we've heard from people that want to talk about the environmental considerations. Should we direct them to come to the forum next week, or would it be better to direct them to attend a future school building committee meeting? I'm just not sure how to respond to people like that.
My suggestion, if they're neighbors with just general interest or comments, they should definitely attend the forum next week. I know a couple of neighbors had reached out with specific concerns. We're trying to talk with them ahead of the forum. But I think in general, they should send any questions they have through the website, and then we can kind of determine if it makes sense to have them come to this meeting or if meet separately outside of this meeting. But I would direct them to the email address if with any questions, and if they have general interest in the project, definitely attend the forum next week. And then the green community, I think, as Chris mentioned, once we get more information put together for this committee regarding the base design of this building, I think then we'll, you know, after schematic design is where we'll get into a lot of that sustainability conversation in a lot of detail. So I think maybe let's get through the presentation from TAP A on kind of a base sustainability design of the building, and then see what follow-on meetings we need from there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Do we have any final questions or comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I have a motion from Ms. Lawson. Do we have a second?
Second.
A second from Ms. Gallivan. I'm going to poll the committee. Ms. Gallivan.
Yes.
Ms. Lawson.
Yes.
Mr. Jack Fisher.
Yes.
Dr. Goff.
Yes.
Ms. Santiago Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Senig.
Yes.
Mr. Connor.
Yes.
Mr. Jeffrey Fisher. Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
All right, very good. Mr. Jack Fisher.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
And Mr. Salvatore.
Yes.
And Mr. Conroy.
Mr. Conroy had to leave a little early, so
all right, very good.
Let you know. I just wanted to thank all the consultants for their presentations.
Yes, thank you all.
Very helpful.
I vote yes as well. Thank you all tonight, and
so do I, Mark. Jen Gayositz.
Oh, Ms. Gayositz, I'm sorry. Very good.
No problem.
I'm having difficulty seeing everybody tonight. Right, thank you all, and have a good night. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.